Serious, Redditors who have lost a friend or family member to a cult. How did it happen? Two of my college housemates went out one evening to buy cigarettes and came back converted to Scientology. One eventually got out of it, but it took years. The other, I have no idea. It was like a horror movie about pod people taking them over. The worst part about Scientology to me is the time you lose by involving yourself in it. Members can spend 18 hours of their day being audited. Children are separated from their parents for months at a time, essentially erasing the familial relationships. It seems that the children learn to never trust anyone or be loyal to anything other than their religion. They are told that it's their responsibility as a Scientologist to rat out anyone who says something that even slightly opposes the church's beliefs. If someone reports you to the church, you're required to go through the auditing process for hours and hours at a time, at your own expense. It's bonkers. Here in Central Ohio, we have a cult called Xenos. They market themselves as a Christian home church group. In reality, you will be pressured into moving into a home where you share a room with others of the same gender in order to prevent premarital sex and masturbation. You will be forced to shun all non-Xenos friends and family you have. It's pretty baffling how people keep falling for it. I lost a friend to it years ago. Haven't heard from her since. I saw her at the store once a few years ago and she refused to even acknowledge my existence. She wasn't permanently lost, but my aunt joined the Children of God in the 70s. She was down in Texas doing student teaching and one day her roommate called my grandparents to say she hadn't seen her in a couple days and was pretty sure some people took her to Mexico. My grandparents immediately drove down to Mexico, hired a cult deprogrammer, and rented a house near the cult compound. They basically blew as much money as they could afford, but never saw her before they had to give up and go back home. A little while later, my aunt called home to tell her parents she was getting married. They told her to wait until spring break and they would come down for the wedding, but she said she couldn't. A few months after that, she brought her new husband to the US to meet the family. They are still married today and I basically just learned about the whole thing like 6 months ago. My step-aunt, uncle, and their daughter are Scientologists. My step-uncle had a drug problem when he was younger and Scientology said they could help him. Surprisingly enough they didn't. He got clean but he got roped in. He and his family work for them now. His daughter works on the cruise ship they have. They seem pretty normal but they occasionally send us DVDs to try and convert us. Also when my rather wealthy grandpa died they wanted to take some of his possessions to sell to Scientology. Correction, uncle works for Kodak not the church directly. Edit, changed concept to convert lol. Does losing someone to an MLM cult count? Not only lost a friendship, but had to unfollow all their posts. I can't answer their calls, texts, or messages because it's all about me being on their life-changing team and supplementing my income even though my spouse and I both own our businesses, love our jobs, and don't need supplemented income. If you're reading this and in an MLM, think about the friendships you have had with people for many years. Don't throw it away for the small chance you will actually make good money. Lost a girlfriend to a jewelry one called Stella and Dot. She told me she was $100,000 in credit card debt because of it. I told her I wasn't going to buy anything ever because I didn't support her doing an MLM and she said okay. Several months go by of not talking and she reaches out to me and some friends to binge watch a show together at her house. We show up and her damn studio apartment is decked out like a jewelry showroom and she hands us order forms. Blindsided. I had to block her on everything. A friend of mine told he how she lost her friend to Scientology. It was more or less because they were residents of Hollywood and would walk down Hollywood BLVD every day to go school. They'd pass the recruiting center every single day and pay no mind. But one day her friend decided to go in. She said after high school. Her friend dissociated with her after realizing she wasn't going to convince her to join. My so went to JIDMID in Hollywood back in the day and they not only verbally warned the students to keep away from the Scientologists. It was actually posted as well. So I got out when I was 20-21. And by got out I mean was demonized and disowned by my mother, who then married the cult leader after he divorced his wife for having an affair. Big old pile of shit. Cult leader's wife was my ex-step-grandmother. Long story. My mom's not great at picking men, but she's still in it now and won't talk to me. Though she did try to make me see the error of my ways a couple months back. I'm in my early 30s now. Apparently the cult leader is dying of cancer to the mouth, which is incredibly appropriate. Anyway, once he dies I'm hoping to be able to slowly talk sense into her again. I mean, that's about how. Could go into more detail, but scotch and video games with friends are tonight. I don't know if it was an actual cult, but after my cousin did a legit Teach in Asia program she decided she was in love with Buddhism and joined a temple in Thailand. Haven't gotten to the cult stuff. Bear with me, whatever that meant. Then after a couple of months there she went to India. About 6 months there and she decided to come home. But she was still in love with the temple life. So she joined a group in the US working with Tibetan monks. She was always a little loose on the details. Then one day she up and leaves everything behind to study Tibetan language somewhere in Vermont, and then before we know it, they have sent her back to India. The group in Vermont is the shady part, because my cousin was advised not to talk about who they were, where they were, or how it all worked. She was completely out of touch by modern means for 6 months, and only sent some letters with no return address and a very robotic format of "it is so wonderful here. Everything is beautifully TC etc." Then about 2 months after she had been in India she leaves the group and contacts us to say everything is okay, but she is staying in India because she met a boy who does happen to be a Tibetan refugee. So there is that. Anyway, they got married, came to the US once they could get him a passport, took about 2 years, and now they are happily living in the US. She still won't talk about what happened, though her husband has let slip that something shady was going on. He also won't say what. My aunt's brother had schizophrenia and joined a cult in which one must worship pagan gods whilst drinking urine through the nose. His father, a 6 feet 6 inches Israeli soldier, went to the cult leader's house and dropped him off a balcony. It didn't end well for any parties involved. Edit, the cult leader didn't actually die, so nothing became of it. Also my aunt is not blood related, so her brother is not technically my uncle. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness and grew up with most of my family being a part of the religion. When I was 10, my mother left the church and then was disfellowshipped, shunned, for having my sister out of wedlock. I was told that I could not associate with her after I became an adult, and that started me on the path to leaving this Christian group. I later on, at age 23, after not attending church for close to 5 years, also was disfellowshipped for having a child while single. This meant that everyone in my family besides my mother and half-sister could no longer talk to me. My father, stepmother, stepbrother, aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends, all of them gone. It can be emotionally devastating. My mother took her own life exactly 2 years ago today. I have a beautiful son, incredibly supportive and loving husband, and a new family that has helped to start healing those wounds. If anyone who is going through a similar situation ever needs a listening ear, there is a huge community, including myself, out there who can aid in the healing process. My parents told me when I was younger that they knew, casually, not like best friends or anything, married couple that joined the People's Temple in the Bay Area. They didn't go to Guyana. However, Jones had left some people behind to take care of the property. Approximately a year after the mass suicide, the couple disappeared. Nobody knows if they decided that they wanted some grape flavor aid to, or if they were disappeared against their will. Sorry, not much to the story. I've lost a friend of mine to Ansarallah Bangla, an offshoot of ISIS in Bangladesh. It was back in 2014. He was a computer science student, but most importantly a poet. He is one of the most amiable persons I've ever met. We used to hang out a lot in our hometown since he was one of the few of same-aged friend I had back then. We were tremendous dreamers and very lazy workers. Till this day, I just try to make sense of the murder and the aftermath. He, although was an atheist, never ever lied about his belief system, since atheists are always shunned in our country. All of his very few blog posts are either poems or short stories. He was never active on social platforms too. If anyone knows his belief or disbelief, they do by personal attachments. So when I learned about the murder, I've never suspected the actual cause can be his belief system. Someone sold him. Someone close. Maybe a friend from university. A Facebook page of Ansarallah Bangla claimed that they held him for practicing atheism in personal life. They attacked him in his apartment. Barred 2 of his friends. Butchered him. Stabbed him right into his skull. He died bleeding. Instantly. This death has given me some subtle ideas about death that was not present even a year before when my father died. I understood. Life is not fair and anyone can kill you for no rhyme or reason, and that is exactly why I have to shout out my ideas no matter what is the cost. Before that event, I was a pro-death nihilist and afterward a life-savoring nihilist. Life goes on. Yet, he left a mourning girlfriend who still mourns. Some friends who don't eat certain foods, those are favorite of him. It's a death I can't get quite accustomed. I lost my entire family. On my father and mother's side. Almost the entirety of people I grew up with and knew. As if I was never born. Raised Jehovah's Witness. Just because the religion is prominent in our society does not discount the fact that it is by definition a cult. Father tried converting a JW, knocking on the door to Islam even though I warned him not to. Didn't go well. Head honcho showed up next week and told us we were wrong. And then stomped off. I lost an aunt and cousin to Weight Down Ministries. It's run by this woman named Gwen Shamblin. A real nut job. She lives in Franklin, TN, in this huge mansion where she broadcasts live church webinars multiple times a week. People all over join in and host these church gatherings at their homes. They get you in by introducing it as a weight loss program. Simple. Lose the weight quick and easy and never gain it back. Eat what you want. So you go, wow, this sounds great. Then they slowly introduce the Bible and she'll preach to you through online videos. Then you get recruited to a church in someone's home near you where the service lasts for 4 hours. So anyways, my cousin and aunt got sucked into this and now they moved away to live in Franklin, TN, where they worship every breath this Gwen Shamblin woman takes. Everyone that joins ends up marrying someone else inside the cult. My cousin's sister wasn't allowed in her wedding because she wasn't part of the cult. Here's a link to her website. But I suggest reading more about her online. It's very interesting and scary. Gwen Shamblin's website. Most people wouldn't consider Southern Baptist a cult, since it's pretty mainstream where we live. But the degree to which my father embraces it, and the amount of time, effort, and money he puts into it, I think it's reasonable to call it cult-like. His parents raised him in it. But I remember as a very young kid that we didn't go to church as much as we would later. Once a week. And sometimes we'd miss a week and it wouldn't be a big deal. He got back into it when his dad died. And then doubled down when his mom passed several years later. He started forcing us to go to church too. Sometimes 3 times a week. Those losses had a profound effect on him and I guess he just really wants to buy into the idea that he'll see his parents again. Can't really blame him for that, I guess. But it has put a considerable strain on my relationship with him. Especially lately. Since he's made friends with this guy who is even more fundamentalist than my daddy's. And he's been bringing this guy around the house. This guy. There's no other way to say it. He's just straight up crazy. My dad is passionate about his beliefs, this guy's fanatical. The kind of person I'd be worried might blow up an abortion clinic or something. I had a conversation with a guy shortly after the Vegas shootings. And he all but came out and said those people deserve to be shot for just going to a sinner's hellhole like Vegas. I've lost several friends to the Mormons. While the LDS is kinda one of those borderline cultish groups, mainly because it's so popular in certain sections of the country, the change you see in a person when they convert is pretty extreme. Had a friend who went from a key member to my high school friend group to complete stranger after his 2-year mission. He now refuses to speak to most of us, which is a shame. Similarly dated a girl in HS that was a Mormon but not very convicted in her beliefs of it because of the treatment of women. I'm also socially progressive. When they saw I wouldn't convert, that similarly did not go over very well. She disappeared and became very much a Mormon woman, practicing the quiverful tenet. Some will argue that Mormonism isn't a cult, but if you compare what Mormons believe and required to do and what your idea of a cult is, you'd see a lot more similarities than differences. They require their believers to do some pretty extreme things and manipulate them to a high degree. I didn't lose anyone, but I saved a kid from it. I was in the Midwest hanging with family. There was a fossil bed near the town we were staying at that I liked going to dig up little fish skeletons and fossilized clams. Anyway, I found a kid wandering around town one day and he tried to get me to join his doomsday church. He was quoting the Bible's verses on the apocalypse and how to reach salvation and all that shit. I'm happily Catholic and wasn't falling for his pitch, but I offered to show him something really cool. He followed me out to the fossil bed and we managed to dig up a really big fish. I started asking him questions about it, trying to prod him into figuring out that the land we stood on used to be an ocean about 67 million years ago. He denied it at first, so we kept digging. We found shark's teeth, clams, and even squid pens. He tried telling me that dinosaurs are a truck by Satan, but I responded that how could Satan know to put these bones here? He said Satan knew all. And I responded that only God knows all. That's why Satan never wins. Did God put those bones here for us? Eventually he realized that the world does change over time without shaking his faith. I went back to that town a few years later and ran into him at a local restaurant. He'd had a rough few years. Someone had ratted on him looking up facts about the prehistoric ocean. The cult disavowed him and his parents threw him out of his house. He went to his grandmother's place for the next 3 years before he found a permanent home with someone his grandmother knew about 3 hours away. He was only back in the town to visit the fossil bed for a school project on evolution. I haven't heard from him since. I think the cult disbanded or got raided by the D. Something about them making meth or some shit like that. Either way, I'm glad I was able to help him with some help from some old bones. I knew a troubled kid with depression and suicidal tendencies. He was definitely in a bad place and went to seek help. Ended up talking to a support group and there was an undercover cult recruiter in the group who targeted people just like him. Haven't seen him since. My mother grew up in the Exclusive Brethren, also known as the Plymouth Brethren. If you haven't heard of them before, basically they can't communicate with anyone who's not in the religion. No radios or TVs. Extremely strict rules. Women with long hair, skirts and scarves, etc. Long story short, because she would never have been able to go to university, my grandpa decided to get them shut up, basically ostracized from the community whilst also being in it, then excommunicated entirely. So all was somewhat well until my grandpa died. Then my grandma went back into the religion. They went around a couple of their rules so we could see her now and then. But before she died I hadn't seen her for years. Somebody higher up sent us an invitation to the funeral and mum and I went. Singularly bizarre experience. But I was grateful for the chance to see her one final time. She loved me a lot. Once. And it really hurt when she chose the church over us. A friend of mine from college decided to attend what she called a Bible college in Florida after she graduated. The guy who runs it is an absolute nut job. He was a big evangelist preacher in the 90s who goes around spouting insane conspiracy theories today. He has even made an appearance on InfoWars. This girl and I got along fine through college. She lived with my Sue and we were in the same major, so we had a lot of classes together. I always knew she was religious and a little off, but I had no idea just how bad until the week we graduated. I about shit myself when she sat across from me on my Sue's couch and spoke in tongues. She proceeded to tell me that God was paying for her to go to this school and get a certificate in worship or some shit. She showed me a video of a sermon from this guy. And I told her point blank that she was getting fleeced into joining a cult. She got really offended by that. She has had spotty communication with people from college at best and no one really knows what she is doing. It sucks because she was my friend. And my Sue's friend. And I didn't want to see her get sucked into that, but there is no getting through to some people. My ex-friend's dad. I am not sure if you could call it a cult per se. But he belonged to one of those snake churches. Followed Alex Jones. And spent all of his money on prepping. And he spent all of his time on different chat rooms and forums with other people like himself. I know it put a huge strain on the family.